Good morning. This is the Blaine's World webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And you can also find more information on my website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country who do really cool stuff. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Connie Regan-Blake. Is it Regan?
Reagan,
Reagan,
actually,
sorry
yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
I'll get it right one time. Owner of Story Window Productions, for being my guest today. And Connie, welcome aboard. You can wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. Okay.
Thanks, and nice to be here.
Okay, that's Connie. And Connie Regan-Blake is one of the founding mothers of the performance storytelling world in this country and beyond. She's known for bringing the wisdom, humor, and drama of stories to the main stage, the concert halls, schools, festivals, libraries, and into the corporate world. She was also a sought after workshop leader and story coach. And the question I always ask Connie, first time, or I once asked you many years ago, this question is: as a child, you grew up where?
I grew up in Alabama and also in Florida.
And as a child growing up in Alabama and also Florida, did you always know you wanted to be a storyteller?
No, not at all. That was not on the radar. We moved to Florida because my mom's family, originally from Tennessee, two of her brothers moved down to a little rural area in North Florida. And my dad worked for the government, and he found a job close by because my mom wanted to be with the rest of the family. And so we spent a lot of time growing up near Palatka, Florida. I was raised in Jacksonville, but Palatka, Florida. And our family would get together all the time. And there was lots of stories, but it was more kind of family stories on one another as opposed to traditional. My dad told a few stories over and over because I really liked them a lot, the same ones. But I had no idea as I was heading through school and off to college. Mathematics was my first love. And then I ended up shifting to political science, which some folks say is a good background for
Right.
storytelling. But I thought at one point I might be a politician and kind of ditched that pretty soon.
Well, you still have time, by the way, in your
No,
next life.
no, it will not be on the agenda at all. But I had no idea. I didn't even, of course, back then it wasn't a profession really. You have humorists and comedians and actors and all of that, but you didn't hear about people making a living as a storyteller.
Let me ask you a question, Connie, in regard to what you just said about you hearing stories from your dad and loving to listen to your stories from your dad. Is that something that um, people like? Do people ever get tired of hearing stories, or what's your thinking of that? Especially if they hear the same story over and over.
There's something inside us humans, I think, that draws us naturally to stories, both to tell and to listen to them. And you think about our history as being humans on this earth, it's only been very recently, compared to the whole amount of time, that we've had the written word. So before then, everything was verbally, everything was done through stories. And today, too, I'm sure you'll agree, it's a lot easier to remember things if somebody tells you a story about it. And the excellent teachers really get that. And so our brains, I think, are wired for stories and for storytelling. So it's always been a part of who we are. And it's more kind of in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Everyone was getting electricity. People started turning to radio and then to television. And then, of course, in the last 20 years to their computers and phones and such. So they turn a lot of different places now, but the storytelling is right there. Some people used to talk about, oh, storytelling was dying, and I don't feel it could ever die because it is a part of us, but it has gone underground a bit. And there's a lot of things happening right now that are sprouting up new seeds from that storytelling desires.
It's funny
And
because I asked you the question in that I love listening to stories. I love listening to stories, especially from my father. You were mentioning your dad, but it always bothered me, Connie, is that my mother would sometimes stop in the middle of it or something, and she'd say she's heard that story or she's heard it, 47 times. And it's funny, I have just the opposite reaction. Same, even with my wife.
yeah.
I don't mind hearing a story. I love hearing it. I love hearing it kind of over and over. And each time it's a little bit different. There are changes and learn a little bit more. But isn't that cool that, or at least I can do it at least, that I still love hearing a story, even if I've heard it.
Yeah, and some of that depends on the storyteller. So those great storytellers, one of my main teachers, to hear him tell the same stories, just like you said, because even though a lot of the words might be the same and the bones of that story are the same, it's happening in that moment. And that's really one of the keys to being a good storyteller, is being right in the moment. But I think, I sometimes people will ask me that question about repeating stories and such. But, if you go to a performance and it's your very favorite star in the music world, you don't want to hear all new stuff. You want to hear those songs that resonate the most with you, that brought you to that concert. And some of that is true with stories. I do feel there's a blend. So if I'm doing a evening performance somewhere and I was there 6 months beforehand, I'm not going to do the exact same set list, the exact same stories, but there's a good chance I might dip into those or maybe refer to them. And so that people who weren't there can still feel like they're engaged with it. But the ones that were, then, yeah, and that can draw that back.
As a storyteller, do you keep a record of the stats or the stories you've told? For
I
example,
do.
oh, okay.
That
So,
goes way back, years and years and years. I've kept that.
well, this reminds me of the fact, almost it sounds like movies, in that I used to think, Connie, if I saw a movie, I'd never want to see it again. Then it became 25 years ago. Then it became 10 years ago. I kid you not, I don't know if you're like that. Now it's 5 years, 1 year. If I see a movie, it, I guess it's, as you get older or whatever the case is, but becomes new each time I see it, even though I saw it so many times. Do you have that same experience?
Not so much for me with movies. When something is exactly the same,
Right.
there's a different feeling to it. And just what you were saying about the stories, that they can sometimes be a little different. And as I was saying about what I sometimes refer to as this telling. If I told it
Oh,
last week to the very same people, this telling, a week's gone by, so we're all different people. And if we stay inside that story, then it's a different experience. If it's more, and for me, a movie, there's some, but in general, I don't go back to movies again. But everybody has their own preferences.
well, it's funny you also say that. I'm thinking about a good friend of mine, and we meet for breakfast each week. And I find myself, Connie, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I find myself, even with my wife, saying, well, I don't know if I told you this or, this story. And my good friend had such good stories. And I love hearing them, I love hearing him. He tells about his experiences in college, and I've heard, but it's funny, even though I've heard a lot of them, like you said, this telling, I never get tired of them, and with my dad, I never get tired of my wife's stories. I never get tired of. Um, but I guess that's maybe being polite or whatever, but just I don't get tired of stories, so that's I guess I guess the best candidate to come to one of your seminars or whatnot, I'll think it's new all the time. Or what's the joke? I have trouble remembering three things, names, faces. I can never remember that. So back to story. Let me ask you this, Connie. Are certain people, for example, you talking about your dad, are certain people born storytellers?
I think there are a few that is really their path in life. My mentor, I just referenced him a few minutes ago, but Ray Hicks,
Oh,
mountain
okay.
storyteller who was a dear friend and really remains a huge part of my life, even though he passed 21 years ago. I feel like I often bring him on stage with me, but he was born into it. And I do think there's some, but for a lot of us, it's, I sometimes liken it to pottery or a different art form or playing the fiddle. You know, if it's something you have a desire for, if you think, I think I'd like to do that, then what you do is go to a teacher and you find out some of those basics and you get going on it a little bit. And then if you find, I like this, or this is turning out really good, then you keep at it. And there's definite skills. Storytelling, I feel, is both an art and a craft. And it's specific skills that anyone, if they have that desire, can learn. They can fit their own personality, their own stories. And then if they play with it and work towards it and put it on the tongue, then they can become really good storytellers.
And let's talk about that process, Connie, in terms of if somebody is listening or watching this today and they have this, we spark a desire to become a storyteller. Perfect timing, and that leads up eventually to the workshop you'll be doing. But how does somebody start to become a storyteller?
Well, one of the things that I encourage is listening to other storytellers. So that can be a way, not so much, you're not going to be listening to other stories and storytellers to take their stories or to, it's not that kind of thing, but it gives you some idea of the rhythms. And it also gives you a sense of what is it you like as a listener. And yeah, you can listen to some of the traditional storytellers like Ray Hicks and get a sense for why some of those stories have been around hundreds and hundreds of years. You can find other storytellers, lots online, lots in the Asheville area if you happen to be around here, really all over the United States. Every state in the union has storytelling festivals, and many countries around the world have festivals and storytelling groups. So you can listen to different storytellers and you can keep that ear if it's something you're interested in. Maybe after you listen, go ahead and put yourself right in there, take it all in. But after you listen, you can kind of think, what did I like about that? And that can start to inform you about what kinds of stories you might tell or what some of your style might be. We go into learning things often by mimicking and copying. That pottery teacher is going to show you how to do your hands. And then if he or she sees, well, your thumbs aren't quite working, they might have you work more this way, or, they can adjust to that. But eventually, if it's something that's really calling you, you find your own style. And the same is with storytelling. You don't want to exactly copy someone else, but some imitation is fine because that's the way we learn.
Best, I would imagine, is do this in person, of course. So you're telling a story, getting feedback. But can you do this also via YouTube? I mean, just studying other people's stories?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And the taking some of those first steps for yourself, listening to stories on YouTube is really, that's great. Or supporting them by getting their digital downloads or listening to Spotify, if they have a channel or something like that. But listening to different stories can be a great way to get started yourself. Also, taking workshops can be, working with a teacher and someone whose approach you resonate with or think you might resonate with. One of the things that to me is very important is that a workshop atmosphere be very supportive. It's not like other artistic forms where, and I learned this, Blaine, very early on in my career. I've been doing this a long, long time. And very early on in my career, it came to me about that we really learn by finding and looking for what works with what we do. There was a great choreographer. She lives out in Arizona now and is a MacArthur Fellow. And I met her very early on back in the 80s. And with her dance work, she had come up with a whole different way of approaching feedback, because what dancers mostly got, I don't know if it's still the same now, but during her time of coming into that artistic world, what they mostly got was, well, you're doing this wrong and you need to change this and do your foot that way and you need to move faster. And she said that was so disheartening to her. And so instead, she started doing some peer kinds of coaching, getting with other dancers and working on things. And when I first met her, she just had she was doing, it was an arts gathering of Arts South, I think is what it used to be called back then, all different kinds of artists gathering. And it impacted me. She had a little 2-page printout of the way she was doing that with dance. But it really resonated with me. And I took that and developed my own style for giving feedback to people and teaching them to give themselves feedback. And it always starts with appreciations, what I call appreciations. And I'm racking my brain right now for this woman's name. I know her, and it'll come to me in a minute because I want to give her kudos.
A shout out, yeah.
But the way that I ended up developing from that first hearing about it is that in all my workshops, all my coaching, and working with people on stories, I always have them as the storyteller, as the person wanting to try this out. When they finish, the first thing they do is think about what they liked about that telling. What was it? If you're going to go, maybe you just told that to me or to 3 of us or to your family around the dinner table. So if you were going to go to your next door neighbor and their dinner table and tell it, what about this telling would you want to take there? So your ego, your brain, your artistic self gets used to you always looking for what works. And that's a whole different concept with the arts.
No, it's such a cool concept. I just love it because, like you said, that usually you do something and you wait for the feedback, and
yeah,
people,
or you say, "Tell me what's wrong."
Right. That's interesting. I have a spin on what you just said. Sometimes when I ask for feedback, I'll say something to the effect of, "Tell me one thing you liked about this." As opposed to, I don't know about you, Connie, but when I ask for feedback and what you like about it, it's too broad. It's very hard to answer. But tell me, even as a teacher, Connie, I would ask, what do you like about my course? What didn't you like about it? And what's one thing I could have done better? But always, to me, it's easy to look for one thing at a time rather than ask somebody broad feedback. So,
and I don't even mention the what didn't you like or what could do better at the beginning, because really, and oftentimes, we people in the Western world are so almost hardwired. It's not hardwired because it's not who we are as humans. It's something we learn, but we learn that even we might give ourselves an appreciation. We might say, "Well, I like my voice," and that "but" is right there on top of it, even if it's not said. And I do not allow that. I'm a pretty easygoing teacher, but there's certain things I'm strict on, and that's one of them. And I really have people take a breath and then come to a period at the end of, and I'll even help them with some of the phrases. I really liked it when that way that I use my voice for the dog, so that there's ways to do this. And again, you're reinforcing that that's what you're looking for. If you have I liken it sometimes to a 1-year-old learning how to walk. And what we do is go, "Okay, come on. Okay, try it again. Let's go. Oh, come on. We're not saying, if you would just move your left foot just a little bit it's a little bit straighter, that works so much better. You'll thank me the rest of your life." We don't do that. We only give the encouragement. And no
But
matter how long people have been doing storytelling or how long they've been maybe in front of people and used to it or whatever, each new story is a new baby.
Ken Blanchard, I think it is, talks about that. He talks about 1 minute praisings, and you catch people doing things right, as
Mhm.
opposed to like the baby example was a classic one where Spencer Johnson actually wrote about that when he talked about the 1 minute father. And you only catch people doing things right, 1 minute mother, not doing things wrong, and that's a great point. Let me ask you this, Connie, because it's a perfect segue into what you're going to be doing. So people can watch YouTube, they can ask for friends, form story groups, they can go to storytelling events. But one of the cool things is you're going to be doing one upcoming this month, right? That people can learn about how to tell stories.
That's right.
What's that all about?
So this one, it's called Story Treasures, and it's finding and nurturing your storytelling voice. And several of the workshops that I do, I've done lots of workshops over the years, and several of them are geared more to people that are already telling stories. And there's a performance aspect, and then we're talking about performance skills, and it's a very different kind of thing. But this one in particular is really for all levels of interest in storytelling. So if you've been told as a child that you could tell a story and you wanted to revisit that, or you enjoy that aspect, or you're already doing it, maybe you're in the corporate world and you know how important storytelling is and you'd really like to incorporate some of that storytelling into your presentation, whatever it is, this particular workshop is for all of those levels. And it's to give you that, my goal is wherever you are on that path, whether you're taking your first step or you've already done a half marathon and you're just wanting to push to when you can do a full marathon, wherever you are on that path, that my intention is to help you take the next steps.
So even this workshop, then, even if you have no experience in storytelling, you're welcome to this workshop.
That's right. That's right. It's a very supportive atmosphere with this whole thing we're talking about with appreciations and such. I'll say that there is a time for us then to come to what can make it better, just like you were saying. But I really like that the appreciations having their own life. And then if I'm working with a teller in front of a group, which this will only be if people are comfortable doing it. People don't have to get up at all during this workshop. But then I open it up and let them pick people to give them appreciations. And the next step, if there is a next step, and they're wanting to go further with their storytelling, the next thing is for the teller to say what they would change. Not everybody else, not anyone else. What is it? Because they often know, I did that voice too quick. And next time if I tell it, I'll slow down. And again, that's just a easier way for us to take that in. But for this workshop, there'll be some partner exercises, and I'll be giving what I call sparks, different ideas, and they'll have 2 to 3 minutes to get with a partner. And I guide people through all of that, and then we'll kind of build on that. It'll be some personal experience and also some traditional stories.
How long is the workshop?
So it's a full days on almost full days on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday it's 9:30 until 4:30, and Sunday it's 10 until 4. And it's over at that beautiful the Vistor Center, which is also the home of Lenora Ryan University
Sure.
here in Asheville, in North Carolina. For those folks that are elsewhere, it's a beautiful time of the year to. Anytime's beautiful around here, but spring is a beautiful time to come visit. And in the room where we'll be, you have a view of the mountains, which is really great too.
How do people find out about this workshop?
So I have a website, and that is Story Window. So just I think of storytelling as opening a window for us, storywindow.com. And there's a drop down for all my workshops that are coming up. And this one has plenty of information. Also, if you're around Asheville, you might end up seeing this little flyer somewhere. I don't know if that reads the correct way, but
Okay.
that flyer has been posted at some different places. Or they can email me, and I'm Connie at storywindow.com.
Now, let me ask you this, Connie, for people who are interested either in this workshop or getting into storytelling as well. One of the cool things that I always like about storytelling, and I'd like you to address this, is about the fact that you don't have to memorize something. Is that correct?
That's right.
So talk a little bit about, if you would, how do you tell stories without memorizing them? Do you write them down, or you have outlines, or how does a beginning
So
storyteller get
people
into
have
this?
lots of, that's a great question too, Blaine, because that's what staves off a lot of people. The fact of, how do you get all that and you got those exact words? Or to me, people who do memorize, there's some storytellers who are good at that, but a lot of them, it does not sound real because it doesn't sound in the moment. But it depends on your own personality. And over the years, I've really gone on my own path of how I learned stories. In the early days, I did almost tell them word for word. And but now, and probably the last 30 years, the way that I work on stories is working with a listener. I have some friends who are also storytellers. We call ourselves the Story Buddies, different groups. And so we'll get on Zoom, usually on Zoom, but sometimes in person. And each of us will take 45 minutes or an hour and we'll work on a story. And maybe it's a brand new concept for a story, or maybe it's one that I've been working on and I'm telling the next night. So that varies. But I like to put it on my tongue. And what I do, it's so much depends on your personality. And I really understand a lot of people wanting it written down. But it's really good to know that the written word is a kindred spirit to storytelling, but it is not the same. So things change when we're saying it out loud than when it's written down. And so, one way, if you are the writer and you want to work on your stories that way, is to hear yourself saying those words. So you're not sitting down and, I'll write a story, and then I'll tell it. You're really hearing those words come out of your mouth, hearing the pauses, hearing how when we're talking, sometimes we'll say the same words, where we wouldn't say that if we were writing it out as a story. So it's a different art form, and to acknowledge that, I think, is really important. But one of the main things for me that I recommend is thinking in images. So rather than very specific words, if you have an image of the things that's happening. So if it's something that happened to you when you were growing up down by the river and your grandfather was taking you fishing out on the dock. So you're not thinking of FISHINGDOCK. You're picturing that. And the more you can bring your whole body into that experience. So here you are looking up at your grandfather, and he's got two poles he's carrying. It's summertime, it's in East Palatka, and you're walking on the wet grass. Feel that wet grass, even if you don't mention it in your story. And you feel the difference when you come to that wood. There's some splinters, so you remember you have to be a little careful.
In telling a story, Connie, is it okay for an introductory storyteller or somebody just beginning into it to have an outline with them, or can they refer to anything? Is that
Oh, I think that's
acceptable?
fine too. Yeah, I think that's fine.
But
And like I say, so another way for those folks that really like it to be written, or if they're working on a traditional story, we were talking about hearing stories on YouTube and such, but if you want to tell some of those old traditional stories, it's really good to go to the printed word. So at your public library, or online. You can find so many collections of stories that are free and traditional stories. And again, those are the ones that have been around. There's a reason they've been around for hundreds of years and people keep telling them. There's a reason that every culture in the world practically has a version of Cinderella. There is something in us humans that resonate. So if you go to a written word, then you might end up finding several versions and then changing it a little bit for yourself. But then one of the things I encourage people to do, if you have a written version of it, and I do now eventually. So once I work with my story buddies, I eventually get it written down. But it's a told version written down. It's not that I've written a story.
You're giving me an idea, Connie, if I can just jump in.
Mhm.
I've never done this, but typically I'll use an outline. I don't necessarily tell stories per se, but this would be kind of interesting to, instead of having outline, just have a series of pictures, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's been done or, people
Some
do it.
people do that. Some people do a whole drawing
Yeah,
so that they're, if it's a king and a queen and they
right.
have three sons and they go out and meet three different young women and the women take them to their, so they do a whole diagram. I, don't go that route, but we all have different learning styles. I also, so oftentimes when I'm working on a news story, especially if, oh boy, I really want to try this out at this performance. It's not quite ready yet, but should I? Or I'll do a slip of paper with maybe 8 bullet points. And I'll do it in magic marker so I can glance easily. One of the things I always recommend for storytellers, any speakers, is to have water nearby. So you've got it, you've already asked for a little table next to you on stage, and you can just put that list right there. So then that gives you that flow. And so I think that kind of an outline can be great. Like you say, pictures might be very helpful. It's what works for you, is what you want to aim to do. Maybe try a few different ways, but bottom line is it's what works for you.
And just to remind folks, you're listening to the Blaine's World webcast, and my guest on this special edition is Connie Regan-Blake. And Connie, we've been talking a whole bunch of things. So let me just kind of wrap this up with a couple final questions. One, you mentioned earlier that your guru or person you learned a lot from was a storyteller, and her name again was what?
Oh, I learned a lot from a lot of different people, but one person that I mentioned earlier is a choreographer. So she's not in the storytelling world at all. But one of the really key things I learned back in the early 80s was about giving feedback, and that's Liz Lehrman. She teaches out in Arizona. She's still teaching. She's a MacArthur Fellow and really an extraordinary person. I haven't seen her in a long time, but her husband is a storyteller, John Spellman, and that's how I met. And I always like to give that shout out, like we were talking about, Blaine, to give that credit. And the same with stories. If we get a story from someone else, or to mention their name, to call their name, put their name on stage. And again, whether that's around the table or it's a more formal kind of setting, to always give that credit.
And in storytelling, let me also ask you about two other ways people can get practice or experience. I'm just curious your reaction to them. One are the TED Talks. Is that a good way for somebody to get experience telling stories?
I love some of the TED Talks. I haven't listened to a lot of them recently, but over the years, I think they're really can be terrific. You can certainly learn some of what you like about their presentation. Depends on the person. Some of them are
Sure.
definitely storytelling, others not so much, but you can still learn a lot. But if it resonates with you as a storyteller, as a listener, is that something you would maybe like, to hear more of that style? Then it might be you try out some of that, So
Are you familiar with something that I've seen in Nashville and I participated in I may pronounce it wrong, but it's Pekachuka. Is that a name? Have you?
Oh, yes, I'm not positive how you pronounce it,
Okay,
but I have been to a couple of the performances a long time ago. I've not been to anything recently, and I've never participated in myself. We also have the Moth Slams
okay,
here.
right. Talk about that. And you just participated in that,
Yeah, I did. I've heard about the Moth
right?
forever. And I think about 15 years ago, or maybe even more, when it was just getting started, I went to a Moth event or something. But for whatever reasons, I haven't been to one in all these years. And a good friend of mine hosts the Moth Slam every month. It's once a month here in Asheville at the Gray Eagle. And I've been wanting to see him. He lives up in Boone, Ray Christian,
Oh, sure.
storyteller too. And I've been wanting to see him and go to the mall, so I decided to go last month. And probably a lot of people are familiar with that. But what you do is put your name, they have a theme. The theme when I went last month was dazzled. And you can really take that concept however you want. And but if you're interested in telling yourself, you put your name in a hat, fill out some forms, sign away rights and such, and then they draw one name, and that person comes up and tell. And then when that person finishes, they have 5 minutes. When that person finishes, that person draws the next name. So you only know 2 to 3 minutes before you're going to tell. So it's not like they pull out all those names, and which has its real advantages, few disadvantages for some folks. But
Was your name pulled out?
it was, it was,
Oh,
I was number 5, and they have people sitting in the audience. They arrange ahead of time. Several, I think they had 3, and these people give a combined score. So maybe there's 2 or 3 people giving a score from this group, and that group. So it's judged, which I have mixed feelings about that kind of competition within storytelling. And at the same time, the slams have done so much to bring so many more people to storytelling. And it was really fun. I went up and, I'd worked a little bit on the dazzled. The big thing for me was bringing something to 5 minutes. And it was an audience, it was sold out crowd, over 350 people. And they say it's sold out every single month, and just a vibrant audience. They were really into it. And I don't think, I'm kind of known here in Asheville in some circles. I don't think almost anyone, maybe 1% there, knew who I was or knew that I was a storyteller, which was really fun too, because they were just beaming and laughing and into the story so much. And afterwards, I got so much good interaction with a lot of younger people, a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, and probably all the way up, all generations, which is a wonderful thing too, to experience that. But moths and the slams happen all over the world. So no matter where those listening right now, if you haven't gone, and they have podcast, so there's a chance this will end up on the podcast. If people are interested in knowing what I do, I also have a newsletter. I send it out. I call it an occasional newsletter, so I don't inundate people, but I will definitely put it in there if that ends up being picked up by one of the Moth podcasts.
and it'll also be on your website, information about how to find out more about
That's
it.
right. There'll be a link and everything.
And we're mentioning Ray Christensen. Ray's been a guest on this show. Also, he's with another mutual friend of ours, Chuck Fink, who I enjoy as a storyteller too. And
Yeah.
Chuck, I think to his credit, has done a really nice job helping promote storytelling in Weeville area and other areas as well.
He sure is.
he-
Yeah, I've performed out there at his group. He draws a lovely audience, and it's an interesting concept, the storytelling that's happening out there. It's free, and then they take donations. They get sponsors, business sponsors here in Asheville. And I've been out there several times. Another storyteller, Kim Whitecamp, and she's kind of well known, very well known in the storytelling world. She and I did a Halloween performance last year on Halloween, and it was a great crowd of people, and It's a beautiful space, good sound. And so I recommend people to be on the lookout for what's going on
And that's, I think,
wherever their community
the
is.
Weaveville Center, or they call it something
The
center.
Weaverville Community Center.
Beautiful facility. And I'm sorry for keeping you longer than I said I would, Connie, but I'd like to thank you for being my guest this edition of Blaine's World webcast. Also, I'll give you one more chance. If people want to find out more, first of all, about you or the website, best bet is to go where?
To go to storywindow.com.
Okay. And in particular, folks are in luck in that you're going to be doing a great workshop coming up, especially if they're kind of newish into the field. And that's going to be again where?
And that's April 27th and 28th. And it's for all people, including like ministers or grandparents or lawyers or storytellers, or kind of however you might find that you could use storytelling in your life's work or play, then it's going to be open to that.
Okay, again, folks can find that out about that at the website. Like, thank you, Connie Regan-Blake. It's been too long, but thank you again for being my guest on this edition of Blaine's World webcast. I also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. We'll hopefully bump into you sometime in the not too distant future. Thanks, Connie.
Sounds good. Nice talking to you.